Before I start, real quick. If you've ever given years of your life to a company, if you've ever believed loyalty mattered, you might want to subscribe. Not because this is motivational, but because this story ends very differently than you expect. My name is Daniel Mercer, and the day they decided I was no longer needed, they didn't even have the decency to turn on the camera. I was sitting alone in the glass conference room on the 9th floor. Same room I'd been using for years. Same long table. Same stale smell of burnt coffee drifting in from the break area. I had walked in expecting our usual systems review. Nothing special. Just another morning. But no one else showed up. That should have been my first warning. My laptop was open. My notebook was empty. Then the meeting notification popped up. Executive Sync mandatory. I clicked join. 2 black squares appeared. One said People Operations. The other said L. Heart. No face. Just initials. Her voice came through first. Calm. Polished. Practiced. Daniel, thank you for joining on short notice. I already knew. You don't survive decades in corporate tech without learning the sound of bad news. We've made some strategic decisions, she continued. And after careful consideration, your position is being eliminated effective immediately. Just like that. No build-up. No explanation. I stared at the black square where her face should have been. Lena Hart. 30-something. Recently promoted. The founder's daughter. She'd been at the company for barely a quarter. Long enough to change slide decks. Short enough to not understand what actually kept the systems alive. There should be a packet on the table in front of you, she added. Details regarding your transition. I looked down. A single envelope. Off-white. Sealed. I didn't touch it. I'd been with Northbridge Systems since before it had a logo. Before the fancy lobby. Before the press releases. I helped design the core platform that everything else depended on. Not managed it. Not supervised it. Built it. Late nights. Weekends. Emergency calls in the middle of the night when things broke and nobody else knew how to fix them. And now I was being told I was a legacy role. This isn't a reflection of your contributions. The HR voice chimed in, reading directly from a script. We truly appreciate everything you've brought to Northbridge over the years. I almost laughed. Appreciation doesn't come in sealed envelopes. I leaned back in my chair. Is your father on this call? I asked. Silence. Not long. But long enough. He's in external meetings this morning, Lena said carefully. He asked me to handle this personally. Of course he did. After all those years. After everything I built. He couldn't even fire me himself. I noticed something else then. There was supposed to be a third participant. Legal. I'd been told legal would be present for any executive termination. But that square stayed black. Muted. Unmoving. Someone didn't want their name attached to this. Is there anything else? HR asked. I thought about saying a lot of things. About how Lena had announced a full product rebrand without looping in engineering. About how she talked about disruption, but couldn't explain how the platform actually worked. About how she once asked if we could make our infrastructure software feel more emotional. I said none of it. No, I replied. That'll be all. I closed the laptop. Picked up the envelope. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. As I walked out, I passed Ethan Brooks' desk. Young guy. Sharp. One of the few engineers who actually listened when I explained things. He looked up. Saw the envelope. His face fell. Dan. They're restructuring, I said quietly. He knew what that meant. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. In the parking garage, I sat in my car with the engine off. Didn't open the envelope. Didn't need to. I already knew what severance looked like. What they didn't know. What none of them knew. Was that 10 years earlier? On a quiet afternoon after my father passed away, I'd made a decision that would eventually change everything. But they hadn't reached that part of the story yet. They thought this was the end. It wasn't. Not even close. I didn't drive home right away. I sat there in the parking garage with the engine off, watching people walk past my car like it was any other day. They were laughing, checking their phones, talking about lunch plans. Inside my jacket pocket, the envelope felt heavier than paper should. I still didn't open it. Instead, my mind went somewhere else. Somewhere far earlier. Somewhere they never bothered to look. 10 years earlier, I was sitting in my father's home office. The room still smelled like old books and black coffee. Legal pads stacked in uneven piles. Wooden shelves worn smooth from decades of use. My father had been a contracts attorney. The kind who read every line. The kind who never trusted summaries. He died suddenly. No warning. One day he was calling to complain about lazy associates. The next, the office was silent. I was already building the early version of the system back then. Not for Northbridge. Not for anyone. Just me. I'd been writing code late at night after my regular job. Fixing problems I knew companies like Northbridge would eventually face. Security gaps. Scalability issues. Architecture mistakes everyone ignored until it was too late. My father knew I was building something, even if he didn't understand all of it. A few days before he passed, he left me a voicemail. I still had it. Sometimes, on bad days, I listened to it again. "Danny," he said, his voice rough, tired. "Whatever you're working on, don't give it away too early." He paused, like he was choosing his words carefully. "I've watched people lose ownership of their best work because they trusted the wrong timing. Companies don't protect loyalty. They protect leverage." Another pause. "Put it in your own name first. You can always license it later. But once it's gone, it's gone." At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Turns out, he was being kind. Back in my car, years later, I finally opened the envelope. Severance. A few months. Standard language. Carefully worded appreciation. Nothing unexpected. I folded it back up and placed it on the passenger seat. Then I went home. Made coffee. Sat on my couch. And waited. Because when people make decisions without understanding what they're touching, they always reveal themselves. You just have to let them. 3 days later, the email arrived. I remember it clearly because I almost ignored it. The sender wasn't familiar. The subject line was vague. Request for a private conversation. I stared at the name for a moment before it clicked. Mark Ellison. Chief Technology Officer at Redwood Dynamics. Northbridge's oldest competitor. We never talked publicly. But everyone in engineering knew who they were. We watched their patents. They watched ours. Or so we thought. I opened the message. Short. Direct. "Daniel, we believe you may personally control the foundational architecture behind the platform Northbridge markets as their core product. If this understanding is accurate, we would like to speak with you privately." No threats. No pressure. Just curiosity. That caught my attention. I walked to the window and looked out over the street below. Same view I'd had for years. Same quiet routine. But something had shifted. They knew something. And the uncomfortable truth was, Northbridge never asked. They assumed. I typed back a single sentence. "If we talk, it's in person." The reply came faster than I expected. Agreed. That night, I pulled out a box I hadn't opened in years. Old documents. Folders labeled in my father's handwriting. Things most people would have thrown away. Inside was the paperwork I filed back then, when I followed his advice. A small company. Registered quietly. My name on every page. The original system architecture. Documented before I ever signed a full-time contract. Before Northbridge's lawyers ever saw my signature. I read through it slowly. Every clause. Every condition. And there it was. Clear as day. Ownership stayed with the creator. Usage required permission. Changes required approval. Northbridge didn't own the foundation. They were standing on it. Licensed. Not entitled. And when Lena announced that flashy rebrand without asking anyone who built the thing, she crossed a line she didn't even know existed. I leaned back and let that sink in. They didn't fire an employee. They dismissed a risk they never evaluated. The meeting with Redwood was set for the following week. Quiet. No announcements. No paper trail beyond a calendar invite. I packed lightly. Not clothes. Documents. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. And once clarity enters the room, everything else starts to fall apart on its own. The flight out felt unreal. Not because it was fancy. Because it wasn't. No corporate assistant. No executive lounge. Just a window seat and too much time to think. I spent most of the flight staring at the tray table, replaying years of decisions I hadn't questioned at the time. I remembered signing contracts without reading past the summary pages. Assuming good intentions. Assuming loyalty counted for something. My father would have shaken his head at that. When the plane landed, a driver was waiting. No logos. No small talk. We drove through a part of the city that didn't try to impress anyone. Clean streets. Low buildings. Purpose over appearance. Redwood Dynamics headquarters fit the same pattern. No massive glass walls. No slogans painted on concrete. Just a building that looked like it was designed to work. Mark Ellison met me in the lobby. Late 50s. Tired eyes. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived multiple disasters. Daniel, he said, offering a firm handshake. Thanks for coming. You said you knew something, I replied. Show me. He smiled slightly. Not offended. He led me to a small conference room. No audience. No legal theater. Just a table. 2 chairs. A folder placed neatly in the center. He opened it and slid it toward me. Inside were documents I hadn't shown anyone in years. My company registration. The early architectural diagrams. The original filing dates. They'd done their homework. We track core infrastructure patents across the industry, Mark said. When your name kept appearing ahead of Northbridge's filings, we started asking questions. I flipped through the pages slowly. They hadn't missed anything. You're the owner, he continued. Northbridge is a license holder. And that license has conditions. I didn't answer right away. Because saying it out loud makes things real. And they violated those conditions, he added. Publicly. That was the part that mattered. He slid another document across the table. A proposed agreement. Long-term. Exclusive. Clear. They weren't trying to take my work. They were asking permission. I want to be clear, Mark said. This isn't about hurting them. It's about building something correctly, with the person who actually understands it. I read every line. Slowly. No hidden tricks. No rush. This wasn't desperation. This was patience paying off. What happens if Northbridge tries to expand? I asked. Mark leaned back. Then they discover the difference between owning something and borrowing it. I looked at the last page. Signature line. For the first time since the call that fired me. I felt calm. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just certain. I signed. The announcement didn't come right away. They waited. Let the information travel quietly through the right channels first. Lawyers noticed. Investors noticed. Engineers noticed. The first sign came from someone I didn't expect. A message from Ethan. Short. Confused. Dan, something weird is happening here. He said the rebrand materials were being pulled. The new product name quietly removed from internal systems. No explanation. Then came the internal emails. Urgent reviews. Meetings scheduled and cancelled within minutes. Legal teams asking questions no one wanted to answer. The stock didn't fall yet. That comes later. First comes denial. Inside Northbridge, things started moving fast. Not forward. Sideways. Executives asking who approved what. Who reviewed which contract. People realizing they'd relied on assumptions instead of facts. And somewhere in the middle of all that, Lena went quiet. No more keynote posts. No more strategy updates. Because someone had finally opened the old agreement. And once you read it, there's no pretending you didn't. The first lawsuit landed before the press even caught on. Quiet. Private. Investors asking uncomfortable questions. Clients asking for guarantees no one could give. By the time the headlines appeared, the damage was already done. I watched it all from a distance. No interviews. No comments. Just watching a structure fail exactly the way poorly designed systems always do. At the foundation. One night my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A woman's voice. Controlled. Professional. Daniel, this is Northbridge's interim legal counsel. We'd like to discuss a resolution. I deleted it. Because by then, the conversation was already over. They didn't lose me when they fired me. They lost me when they stopped asking questions. The headlines burned hot for about a week. Then they cooled. They always do. One outlet called it a strategic misalignment. Another blamed legacy oversight. A few hinted at leadership mistakes without naming names. But inside Northbridge, nothing felt abstract. People packed desks quietly. Meetings stopped happening. Entire floors went dark in the evenings. Not layoffs at first. Just uncertainty. And uncertainty is worse. I heard from Ethan again. This time his message was longer. They brought in consultants, he said. Everyone's talking in circles. No one's actually fixing anything. He paused before adding the next part. Lena doesn't come in much anymore. That didn't surprise me. When things go wrong, visionaries disappear. Builders stay. Redwood Dynamics moved in the opposite direction. Slow. Methodical. No flashy press releases. No victory lap. They rebuilt the platform the way it should have been done from the beginning. Smaller teams. Clear ownership. Every system documented. I worked with engineers again. Real ones. The kind who ask why before asking how. And for the first time in years, I wasn't explaining compromises. I was explaining intentions. Months passed. Northbridge didn't collapse overnight. Big companies rarely do. They shrink first. Clients quietly move on. Top talent updates resumes. Board members start skipping meetings. Eventually, the announcement came. A leadership transition. No mention of mistakes. No accountability. Just a quiet exit. Lena's name faded from the website within a day. One afternoon, I ran into someone I hadn't expected. The old CEO. He looked older. Smaller. We met by accident at a conference cafe. He recognized me immediately. Daniel, he said. I should have listened. I nodded. Not because I forgave him, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. You built something important, he continued, and I let it slip through my fingers. I didn't argue. There was no satisfaction in that moment. Just closure. Redwood never asked me to go public. They didn't need me to. The work spoke for itself. The platform scaled cleanly. Clients stayed. Engineers were proud of what they shipped. And my name quietly returned to places it had been erased from. Not as a headline. As a footnote that mattered. Sometimes people ask if I regret waiting. If I should have fought harder back then. I tell them no. Because timing isn't about speed. It's about leverage. They fired an employee. They underestimated an architect. And when the building started to fail, there was no one left who knew how to hold it up. That's the thing no one teaches you. Power isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It waits. And when it moves, Everything else adjusts around it.